Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mental Health Multiverse. Today, the topic of discussion is every heroine that we have talked about this season because it is our final roundtable. Can you believe that we've completed an entire season of Mental Health Multiverse? That is wild to me.
I cannot.
Yeah. We want to take the time to thank you for supporting us on this journey so far. We hope that we are fulfilling our mission to help you feel seen, heard, and less alone.
Yes. And for our final episode of the season, we have three very, very special guests joining us today. So welcome to Mental Health Multiverse, Mallory, Kitty, and our second repeat guest, Amber. Woo, woo, woo. So let's actually start with you, Amber. Can you remind the listeners who you are, what you do, and then share your favorite Disney heroine?
Absolutely. I am so thrilled to be asked back because I had such a good time on the first roundtable. And for everyone, just as a reintroduction, my name is Amber Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a clinically trained marriage and family therapist. I transitioned into the coaching world about 3 years ago, around 2020, and then have since kind of like found my way into this world of ethics and leadership and, being more trauma informed, trauma aware, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of these different things that we are just know better, do better is like a really big thing that I talk about a lot. And I think that was one of the things that was so juicy, like during our last roundtable discussion, was we were like talking about the things we love and also like we can love them and there can be a little bit problematic at the same time. So making lots of space for that both and. I came in last roundtable with my favorite Disney heroine being Merida, but ever since then we actually had a little shiny moment for Megara, and I think that she's still on the show for me. So I'm gonna go Megara for me at this point in my life. Like I'm just like the little bit of the baddie vibes. Like I'm calling that in.
I'm into it. I personally love Megara a lot. So
she's smart, she's sassy, sexy.
I wore my hair down just so I could channel the vibes.
Hi, I'm Mallory Grimsey. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm licensed in Connecticut and New York. I've been working for the last 10 plus years guiding teenagers who are struggling with all sorts of things, from depression and anxiety to stuff that's as dark and scary as self-harm and suicidal thinking. So not afraid to go there. There is hope. It does get better. I've seen it over and over again, which is amazing. In addition to doing individual counseling and group counseling for teenagers, I do have some guided self-help programs, and I have a massive free YouTube library full of all sorts of different mental health videos that are geared directly towards teen issues. So trying to get the information out there in a safe, responsible way. Because Amber, I'm sure you can appreciate this as somebody who was a licensed marriage and family therapist. We are restricted in terms of what we can and can't give in terms of advice. So this is kind of my sideways ways of getting that information out there without overstepping that line. Yeah, and I'm super excited to be here because but huge fan of the show. I think I started following Marissa's account randomly and was just love the way that you talk about mental health and different struggles that I think are hard to navigate if you're not being aware of the impact on who is responding or reading or incorporating that. And then Heather, I got introduced to you because of the podcast, and I was like, love this, love everything y'all are about. I'm so excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm so glad you reached out and asked to be on because I'm glad this opportunity came up for you to be on. Who is your favorite Disney heroine?
Oh yeah, that was the main point, right? I think I glossed over that because when I was looking at the list that y'all covered, I was like, They are all so good that it was hard to kind of narrow it down. And I love so much about each and every one of them. But I think it's probably a tie for very different reasons between Rapunzel and Tiana. I think Tiana, I just very much relate to, definitely struggled with like workaholic for a little bit. And then Rapunzel, I just love, she's just this funky and she just is who she is. I just love it.
Yeah, I rewatched that movie last night, and it made me want to rewatch the TV show because the TV show is really, really good too. So if you are a big fan of Rapunzel and you haven't watched it, I highly recommend. It's cute. Anyway,
There's a TV show.
Yes,
I know, right?
is. And it gets pretty dark and deep, especially about like childhood trauma and with Mother Gothel and stuff. So anyway, I mean, but it's not like all deep. It's really it's a children's show, so it's pretty cute. But Kitty, hi, hello, yes. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi, yes, I am Kitty Caveat, and my pronouns are both she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. It is lovely to be here with y'all. I am also a licensed mental health therapist and an artist, community leader, and I really have a big passion for supporting fellow trauma survivors, especially fellow creative survivors, those of us who are queer and those of us who are witchy and spiritual. So that's really where my heart is. And for many of us in those communities, we already know that media, movies, books, everything can be life-saving. And so I'm so happy to be here and to be a part of the mental health multiverse where we can talk about this and talk about how deep and important these characters are to us. And my favorite Disney heroine is Pocahontas. And so I'm really excited to get to talk a little bit about her story, both her story as it was shown to us, and maybe also a little bit about her true story as well.
I love that. We kind of did a little like, we probably shouldn't talk about Pocahontas. So that's what our episode about Pocahontas was like, let's honor the Disney heroine, but also remind people that it was a real person and that we need to honor her too.
Yeah. So I really am excited to talk to you, Kitty, about this because you are a very like smart, intentional, what? A very smart, intentional, and knowledgeable person who I know like a lot of your favorite things are not just very superficial. Like you have very deep emotional ties to a lot of things. So I know her being your favorite isn't just because she's like a kick-ass Disney character, but you know, there's a lot of deep love there. So I'm excited to chat with you about it, especially because Heather and I, you know, in trying to navigate the complications around her portrayal, we were like, but I feel like we tried our best. So very excited to have all of you on and to dive deeper into your favorite Disney heroines and any like takeaways you get from them or their movie or any Disney movie. So just a quick little recap for listeners who maybe this is your first episode or one of your first. We've talked about a lot, as Mallory pointed out, we've talked about a lot of heroines this season. We've had a little over 20 episodes, and at the time of this recording there are 2-3 more episodes that have yet to come out. So yeah, we covered a lot of ground this season. So to recap, here are the heroines that we have talked about thus far as of this recording. Moana, which was HB's favorite. Mulan, which was my LB's favorite. Megara, Rapunzel, Esmeralda, Cinderella, Pocahontas, Tiana, Snow White, Ariel. We also had our mid-season roundtable, which Amber was a part of, along with some other amazing special guests. Belle, Jasmine, Merida, Lilo and Nani, Kita, Giselle, Elsa and Anna, and Alice.
Well, coming up, we've got Aurora, Raya, and there other strong ladies where we kind of loop together Wendy, Tinkerbell, Vanellope, and Jane, and Anastasia.
Yeah.
So,
and that was a fun little
those
episode.
will be released by the time this comes out, but we're recording it before they're released. Yeah.
I'm excited to hear what you do with Aurora because I was obsessed with the color changing dress when I was a kiddo.
That question is coming later. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned because yeah, we have questions for you all about that. But our first question for you, our special guests of today's episode, you've briefly mentioned your favorite heroines, but we kind of want to dive a little bit deeper as to why, like what themes or empowering takeaways or traits that these characters have that resonate with you or inspire you. So Amber, we'll have you go first. Why is Megara one of your favorites?
You know, it's been something where I've been around a lot of very fragile, toxic masculinity lately. Just kind of getting back out there into the world. I actually accidentally made a grown man throw a temper tantrum at a panel discussion that I was at when I very politely asked him to please stop monopolizing the conversation and allow the women, because it was 3 women on the panel and this guy who was literally talking over and shushing the women. I very politely asked if someone else could have a chance to speak and answer the question. And this person literally like stood up and like threw a temper tantrum and left, like walked out. And, you know, so as I'm like reflecting and I'm thinking about, you know, the characters, and one of the things that I really love in terms of what I gather from Megara is that there is this like, I can do it by myself kind of a thing, but then she comes into her own in terms of the strength that she has, and knowing that she doesn't necessarily have to be independent, that she can still be in relationship but still be a strong female. And not only female, but she is a very strong feminine character, right? Like that we got the long hair and like, you know, there's a lot of sassy sensuality like going on there. And allowing herself to be in a position where she's the one that's holding things together, but nobody really knows like how much she's holding together. And I think that that is something that is so relevant for a lot of feminine archetypes, where it's kind of, we have this conversation around the mental load, around invisible labor, right? Like there's so much there that women are just carrying on their shoulders in this society. And I'm speaking from a bit of a heteronormative perspective, but also just that gendered archetype of what women are expected to do. And she takes on all of this to the point where like it literally almost kills her, like in the movie. And that's where being able to come back from that and first of all, ask for help, get help, still be strong and badass in the process. I think that's where she kind of like came into like the top spot for me, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from the way that she navigated, you know, the whole character arc of her story.
Ooh, I love that. And I can totally see I can see you standing up to this person and asking, and I know you. I know you asked as nicely as you could to this person to
I literally
share
just said, can
some
we please
space.
hear from someone else? That's all I said. That's like, I didn't name call. I didn't nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see Megara doing that too. Like,
Sorry, not sorry.
I mean, she would not have been as nice probably as you, but I feel like that is definitely a Megara thing to do, of just like, you can sit down. You've had enough time. Let's let someone else talk, please. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I, as you know, Heather and I are big, as the listeners probably know, we're big Megara fans. Because of pretty much all the same reasons that you talked about. She's very feminine and yet at the same time not very ladylike, which I think is really cool and really kind of inspiring, I think, to a lot of people who are in the same boat of like having to navigate all those expectations of what it means to be a, you know, quote unquote woman in these certain relationships and dynamics and things like that. And that you can still be accepted and loved for just being yourself and breaking out of those molds. And we love to see it.
Yeah, and I also think that she's like sexy in a way that is empowering. Like when I look back at certain heroines that we have talked about, like, you know, these are for the most part kids movies. So there is a certain level where each of these characters was like created for little girls. But there are some characters that I feel like were created perhaps with more of the male gaze in mind, of like, well, we're also going to make her attractive. And I feel like Megara is an example of like sexiness while being empowered without that added intention on it, to me at least personally. Whereas I feel like in some ways, even though Jasmine was modeled after this man's sister, I think that Jasmine is a little bit more modeled towards like, what would a man want to
The
see a
male
woman look
gaze.
like?
Yeah.
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 However, I think Megara, the way that like she is very, for lack of a better word, like sexy, but most of her sex appeal comes from her sassiness and the way she carries herself and all of that. And it just feels like it's because she wants to be sexy, not because the people who created her want men to find her attractive, you know?
No, I think you just explained very well the difference between a male gaze and a female gaze, you know, like how women are portrayed in media. That is very spot on.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's also why I really enjoyed cosplaying her, because I think when we recorded I had not cosplayed her yet. And
Right.
and I have since then, because, well, first of all, I found the perfect dress to do it and was like, I can't not.
Gorgeous.
But also seeing myself in that cosplay is like, whoa, I'm sexy. Like I was like, oh. And so like, and that's not something I think about myself very often. So I think it's like that channeling that like Megara energy and sort of like putting on the dress and putting on her aura and feeling it come from myself with the help of her. Like it just
Yeah.
really did the job. It was great.
Did the job. Yeah. Kitty, I think you got to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I love how Marissa and Amber, you both use the word navigate to describe what Megara does, right? And I think if we, change the angle from like physical appearance to other elements that we might be gazing in a character, I think about her intellect and her strategy. And this really resonates for me as a trauma survivor and someone who helps trauma survivors to reclaim their story and to take back some autonomy. I think Megara is such a great example of someone who makes her own choices, who takes what's available to her and makes a plan. And that's not someone else's plan. That's her plan. And to me, I'm just like, oh yes. And that gets me more on board. Speaking of sexy, I'm like, please make a plan. Please, like, be conniving, be strategizing, be looking out for yourself, taking care of yourself, in the ways that we don't often see in female characters, especially.
Yeah, I think it's that confidence, right? And it's confidence in the form of like self-efficacy, and like self-efficacy being like our own ability to believe in our ability. And that's where I feel like Megara has really high self-efficacy. Like she believes in her ability to fucking figure it out and like do the damn thing, right? And even if she doesn't really know what she's doing, she trusts in herself to know that she will find a way to be okay in the end. And even when things are like really low and like things are not looking good, it is still that self-reliance that never gets lost. Even when, it's like, man, I really like screwed all this up, still like taking full ownership and responsibility and still having that belief in her ability to somehow prevail. And I think that that's really powerful. And usually that's something we only get to see, especially in this framework, through it. Well, I was going to say, like, historically, that's shown in like male characters. So it's really very beautiful when we get to see it in female characters, especially like, when Hercules is the one that's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And Megara's like, come over here and let me teach you something, buddy.
I got you, baby boop.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I think she
No,
does
that's
a
such a good
really,
point.
really nice job of so in dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which is what I primarily use in my practice, there's 5 different like areas or modules that they focus on, and one of them is only for the teenage version, which it really should be for adults too, because we all have this, and it's called walking the middle path. And it's literally being able to kind of navigate these like both and scenarios of like navigating like, okay, this is like the situation, and I'm still gonna like strive for change, and how do I like live in both of those at the same time? And I think Megara does a great job. I think Amber, even the example they used at the beginning of your experience on this panel, perfectly navigates that too. And I know you had, I don't know if I misheard you here, but saying that you made this man have a temper tantrum.
He chose.
Yeah, I think that says if somebody has a larger reaction or response than is typical for a situation, that usually says a little bit more about their own internal experience of that. And yes, perhaps you bringing that to light may have contributed, but like ultimately, we don't cause our situations all the time, but we are responsible for our responses and our responses to our responses. So I think you did fine. And hopefully it was a learning
I'm so
experience
glad
for
you
this
pointed
guy.
that out.
It was something I caught, but then I forgot about it. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
It was really, so my fiance was with me at this event, and afterwards somebody actually asked, they're like, oh my gosh, do you like feel bad? And my fiance stepped up and he was like, what does she have to feel bad about? He was like, that man is responsible for his own responses and reactions. He was like, she asked something very, very
Valid.
like that, like literally a bunch of people like stood up and clapped like after I said that, so I wasn't the only one thinking that. And he's like, she was just the person to say it. And like the fact that he couldn't take that step back and be like, actually, you know what, thank you so much for calling me out on that, I appreciate it, let me take a step back here and allow my other, the other panelists to respond to this before I jump in. I appreciate that, right? Like that's ownership, that's responsibility. And and this is also why I'm marrying, my fiance, because I was like, oh, go off, yeah,
Right. Speaking of sexy, no.
right,
Yeah.
Get that support up in there.
Yeah, I don't think that we always do a great job. Like we talk a lot about boundaries, especially in social media. Oh my goodness, about like how to set boundaries, how to name them for yourself, how to identify them. We don't always do a great job of supporting when somebody else doesn't respect our boundaries or our questions, which is always a possibility, obviously, right? And so I think even that question that that audience member asked you about, like, do you feel bad? That should not be the question. Like, you made a statement, it was uncomfortable, but it also like, we have to sometimes do the daring thing.
Well, I was gonna say, you've like three like therapists on this panel, so like we literally make people uncomfortable for a living. Like lovingly and compassionately and like for their highest good, but like I think, and especially after being, doing this for however many years, I remember like when I first got into, like when they were like, there will be awkward pauses, and you're like, okay, yeah, fine, awkward pauses, and then you're like in your first session where there's like like a pause, like a processing pause, and you're like, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be fine. I don't say anything, right? And now I'm like, I can sit and stare at you for the whole rest of the session if that's what you need me to do. Like, it's fine.
I know you could,
it's fine.
because you have.
Yes. And I think I would want to invite us to even examine our language a little bit too, because I heard one of us say like calling him out, right? And that's definitely like the term that we hear the most often, but I'm really enjoying orienting to the word calling in, right? And if we think about it from that perspective, in this example, how different it could have been if he had felt called in. And as Mallory was saying, this was his experience he was having. The fact that he didn't feel invited to examine himself, invited to support the women, the other people around him, that it really could have gone a whole different way. It could have been an example for other men in the crowd. It could have been so different. And but the opportunity for calling him in was there. And so I want to add that, gratitude to you, Amber, for offering that opportunity for some really deep work there.
Thanks, Kitty.
I love having you guys on right now. This is so good. And if you're not watching on YouTube, as Kitty was saying this, I could like feel the power, and she even like stood up a little bit straighter, and like your hair seemed to get bigger. I don't know, but I was like, damn girl.
There's definitely secrets. There's definitely secrets in that hair for sure.
Top magic. We love it. Mallory, you mentioned that you're kind of competing heroines, or the both and are Rapunzel and Tiana, but can you give a little bit more about why those two?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll start with Tiana because I think she's probably the one that I relate the most to, in the sense of very high achieving, trying to strive, trying to like do all the things and like save everything, you know, and like not worried about like the romance part of it in the beginning of like I'm just trying to like do my thing, like let me like laser focus, right? And I think for my own personal journey, which is like, you know, my dad always says it takes one to know one, and this is probably why I work really well with teenagers that are like in this spot of like trying to like get into the top college, get the best grades, all this sort of stuff, because like I remember. um, but I really, really love that like through that whole movie and through that whole thing, like she really does have this goal, but she does eventually kind of like open up and realize there are more things than the goal, which I think is so important. We're so like outcome oriented, but if we realign with like making choices, like making our goals according to our values rather than the outcome, oh my gosh, you're just so much more happier. Like it's not about like how much money you have in the bank account, what degree you have on the wall. Like it's really about like, okay, is this making me happy, fulfilled? Is it helping? If that's something that's motivating for you. I felt very blessed that I happen to have found a career that is not only fulfilling like in terms of helping others, but also like it totally just like resonates with my soul. So I was very, very excited for Tiana for that. And then with Rapunzel, I just think like this girl just like does not give up hope. She is, again, I think it's like that laser focus. As I'm talking out loud, I'm realizing kind of like the thread between the two. Like you really do, like as much as it's not about the outcome, it's so important to know like what it is you're working for, what it is that you're striving for. If you don't have that kind of like as an anchor, as a guide, it's so easy to get lost and just kind of like do your own thing. But I think even through all of this, she really was like, it's all about like going to that lantern show or what the festival, whatever it's called. And I just really appreciate that about her. And she's just so funny. I just love her.
She is very funny. She's very sassy. And I think we made a comment on the episode when we recorded it, but she is very well. She's not as socially awkward as I think someone who has been trapped in a tower for 18 years of her life could be.
Yes, very valid point.
Yeah. She's very funny, very capable in spite of all of those things, which I also very much admire about her. And as you were talking about Tiana and Rapunzel and kind of that connection there, I think definitely too with Rapunzel, she is worried. She's finally there. The lanterns are about to be lit and sent off. And she's like, what if it's not everything that I thought it was going to be? And Flynn/Eugene is like, then you get to find a new thing, which I love that message in both of the movies, that like it's less about necessarily hitting that goal and it's more about how you're feeling even in the process of and when you reach it. And I think this is something we can all relate to, and maybe we've all experienced in our lives, of either being told or having a goal or an expectation, and that's what's going to make us happier, right? Getting the college degree, getting the big fancy job, making the X amount of money, and then getting there and realizing like either one, okay, I've made it, now what? Or two, I'm here and I'm not feeling the happiness and satisfaction that everyone told me it was going that was going to come with it, you know. And then just being able to adapt and accept that how I'm feeling is valid, and I don't need to force myself to feel gratitude for something that I don't necessarily feel genuinely and authentically. So I'm gonna kind of work toward what better aligns with me, and I like that about both characters. I think they do a really good job of navigating those things.
Yeah, I think a lot of the teens that I work with, they're so laser focused on like, I need to get into this school, or I'm looking to have this job, that sort of a thing. And I tell them all the time, like, I'm a little bit older than you, is saying quotes, because now I feel like that little bit has gotten a lot of it over the years. But like when I was a kid, there are so many jobs that just did not exist just because the technology wasn't there. Like podcast hosts, not a thing. wasn't
Yeah.
even like a thought.
Yeah, it's really cool, the different, and that's the thing too, is I'm running into so many younger people who are telling me they're taking gap years, who aren't going straight into college yet, or who dropped out of college. And sometimes they'll say it with, like, a little twinge of guilt or shame. And I kind of go the opposite way, and I congratulate them. I'm like, that's so cool. You get time to figure out what you want to do. And I love, Mallory, that you're telling young people this, because I have a friend who is a tutor and definitely experiences that with the kids that she helps, of just the pressure they put on themselves to fit into one specific lane or box or whatever. And it's just, there's so much of the world out there. And it's okay to change. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to, like, be on this path for a really long time and think, like, yeah, actually, I really do enjoy this. Get to the thing, enjoy it for a little bit, and then maybe realize this isn't actually what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's okay too.
And bringing it into like a bit of like nervous system regulation, like we are not teaching, like we were not taught, and like we're definitely not teaching the next generation how to actually have a regulated nervous system, right? Like that forward thinking keeps you in that sympathetic fight or flight where you're constant, like you're never being present. You're never actually like sitting into the present moment with whatever's going on for you, because you're always looking at what has to come next. And I think that, again, that's where, as you're talking about those two characters, like it's really interesting because the thing that they realize is about slowing down, right? It's about slowing down and actually enjoying like the little things and what's actually present for them in the journey, and the journey actually being the thing, not the destination or not the outcome. And that's where, like, I've been working so much lately, with a lot of my clients on just nervous system regulation and being able to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and being able to be in the present moment and not engaging so much in those like escapism behaviors of getting wrapped up in, the mind and like being 10 steps ahead of yourself in some weird hypothetical situation that may or may not happen, when you actually have this beautiful moment that's unfolding before you right here, right now. All you have to do is orient yourself to actually be in it.
I love
Yes.
that. I love that so much. I wish that was something someone had told me growing up, was that you're living your life right now. And it's always good to, like, kind of have that forward thinking, that future thinking, and kind of, plan for the future, obviously. But life doesn't start when you get there. It's happening right now. And I wish someone
Yeah.
had told me that when I was younger, because
I feel like a lot of folks like us, folks who are interested in healing and growth and self-development, are asking these questions of, perhaps in Western society, or especially in the United States, we are often given images of what a goal looks like, and that's very external. And we can see that in the case of Tiana and Rapunzel and so many of the heroines, right? They have this image of what something is going to look like. But so many of us, it gets me excited, we're asking the question of like, but how do I want to feel? What do I want tomorrow to feel like? What do I want this moment to feel like? And maybe, just maybe, can I hold that in higher import, or consider that to be more of a priority to me than what it looks like?
It's so true about staying focused on the feeling and everything, because ultimately, we always talk about like who's going to like look out for me, or like, oh, they're not going to say yes, they're not going to say no. But ultimately, we really have to do right by us. We have to look out for our own self-care needs. We can't rely that just because our employer has some like mental health policies or self-care or PTO, like if you need to take PTO and you have PTO saved, that's what that's there for. If you have an obligation, like I remember, and this is again probably why I felt so incredibly aligned with Tiana. I remember I've been working since I was 14, because that was the law when I was growing up in New Jersey. I think it's changed since then, but I remember being like 14 or 15, like terrified of asking for a day off so that I could go to like a family event that like I was a kid. and I did ask, I put it in like on the protocol how you were supposed to, like I wrote it on the bulletin board because we didn't have email or text then. And I know that they had seen it and they totally disregarded it and they still put me on the schedule. And the message that I got was that I'm not allowed to ask for what I need, even as a kid, which is crazy when I think about that. And so I find like with my own generation of like parents that are like my generation and above, trying to do some deprogramming with them when they say like, oh, my kid couldn't possibly miss this sports practice for a therapy session. And I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to make you choose, but like there's always going to be something. And I'm not here to say it has to be the therapy session or it has to be the sports practice. That's for you to decide. But like, don't let other people dictate that. Like, do what you need to do that's right for you, your path. What do you need for your self-care, your mental health? You know, if it is like taking the week off from therapy so that you can feel satisfied and prepared for that big game, do it. There's not a safety risk? I'm fine with that. If there's a safety risk, we're going to have a different conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I like what you said about that. And when we're talking about do what's right for you, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a wrong thing to do. I think we can also get trapped in that mind spiral of right versus wrong, the right or wrong decision. And I think, as we've said in a couple of different episodes of this season, and as we're going to repeat now, and I'm sure, I hope all of you agree with me, it's not necessarily about the right or wrong decision. It's about making the decision that aligns or feels right in that moment, with the information that you have at hand. And then like what you were saying, Amber, about self-efficacy, trusting that whatever happens next, you can handle it. And the things that follow after making that decision, because it's just a decision. It's not necessarily about a right or wrong one. It's a decision that you made that you are now handling and will continue to handle until, you know, XYZ, whatever happens. And I think that's also really important to tack on there.
Yeah. And I think just talking about I'm sorry, go ahead, Mallory.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anybody is familiar with like the DBT language or world or anything, we call exactly what you're talking about, Marissa. It's called wise mind thinking, because it's really about pulling from, you know, your emotional input, your logical, rational, observational input, and then making the wisest choice for you. And that may change sometimes situation to situation or moment to moment. And like what might be right for you or right for somebody else is not always going to match up.
Yeah. And what I was going to say is that the other piece that I do love in pretty much all of these stories is that at some point, people most likely can't handle it all on their own and they get help. And I feel like that's something that there's always some helping involved in pretty like literally, I feel like that's like a plot point that has to happen in like a Disney movie. Like, right. There is some type of like the character like cannot do it on their own, and either that, you know, someone comes to offer help or they have to learn how to ask for help, or there's somebody there that is in the situation with them that's able to come up with a solution that, you know, the two of them can engage in together, or there's a group coming together, right? And I think that that's where, like, when we're talking about like self-efficacy and your ability to like handle things, it also means knowing that you know when to ask for help and also having the ability to receive help. Because going back to what Mallory said, and, you know, I know that we've all had conversations about this, especially over the past couple of years, asking for help, but then also being able to receive it. That's like the other thing, because I don't know about you all, but like I was taught like you do everything on your own. Asking for help is like not like, okay, you're like weak or not as good as someone else if you need help, or like, oh, you're worse, someone else is worse off than you, so you need to figure out, like, there was like all this like guilt and shame that came with asking for help. And I have become so, especially in the last year, I've become so community oriented. And I know this is something that, you know, Kitty also feels very passionately about. I've become so community oriented. Like, we are relational beings. We are meant to help each other out. No one person is supposed to have all of the skill sets needed to accomplish anything. We're meant to work in tandem with one another. We're meant to have, you know, a collective. And so I think that that's also something with all of these stories we get to highlight. And I love actually the cooperation and the collaboration that is highlighted in all these stories.
Yeah. I know this isn't Disney, but what came to mind for me was Lord of the Rings. Like Frodo didn't do it all on his own. He had a whole band of people offering their swords and axes and bows, and I guess for the
Magic.
hobbits, and magic and stuff.
Don't forget the magic.
Yeah, I can't forget the magic to help him finish his quest. And we talk a lot about like the hero's journey because I think that's the structure a lot of these movies are based on. But like you said, Amber, they couldn't have done it without help, whether they begrudgingly accept it or if they like genuinely ask for it. But at the end of the day, they still realize that they needed help, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What else are all the Disney sidekicks for?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think it says a lot too about everybody's contribution to the community too. Like even in this, we have this roundtable. There are 5 of us here, and each of us are contributing and sharing and adding to the conversation in like new and different ways that may not have happened if one person wasn't here or like a different set. It's why I love group therapy. I'm like in love with group therapy. I wish that more people were more appreciative of the power of group and community, but we're getting there.
Totally. Yeah. Kitty, tell us more about why Pocahontas is your favorite Disney heroine.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like, when she's come up for y'all before, it sounds like there's some acknowledgement that Pocahontas can be a complex topic. And so I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page with that. And at the same time, we are here to give her and her story some space today. So I'm going to welcome you, even before we start talking about this character and this film. I want to welcome y'all in the room and anyone listening to really drop into your body when you think about Pocahontas. What comes to mind for you? Do you think of the real life person? Do you think of the character, the movie? And do you feel anything in your body? Do you feel any emotions come up? You might feel nostalgia. You might feel a connection or love. If you're a white person like myself, you might feel some guilt come up. So I just want to hold space for all of the emotions that can come up around talking about Pocahontas. And if you're listening at home and you actually might even need to pause here and take a moment to really spend some time with yourself, that's okay. That's okay. And in fact, I think acknowledging the complexities, acknowledging the depth of emotion that can come up around Pocahontas is part of our way of really honoring and respecting that real person and the real communities that she's a part of. That said, I am not Native American. I am not indigenous to America or to the regions where Pocahontas is from. And in general, I would definitely point to Native American perspectives, leaderships, communities for their guidance on how they want that legacy to represent Native culture or how we can respect her. So I'm going to share some thoughts and feelings of my experience. And I'm excited to hear about y'all in the room as well. But just a good reminder to look towards Native voices when we talk about this Native person who became a Native character in Disney. Okay.
Thank you.
Just
Kitty.
honoring that. Yes. And as we look towards Indigenous voices, probably one of the things I've heard the most is literally learn about Pocahontas, learn about the real human person, learn about how the fact that she was one of the first missing and murdered Indigenous women on this continent. Learn about how she was actually only, I think, between 11 and 13 when this was happening. Learn that she was already married or partnered and actually already had a child before she left to the so-called New World. Learn about what happened with the rest of her life, including the tragic way that she passed away. So educate yourself on these facts and educate yourself, one, because it's important, and two, so that you can become a more informed consumer of this character. Because like Mallory was saying, maybe with like walking the middle path, we can hold both, and we can hold that this person's story was very whitewashed. is in some ways propaganda, right? And in some ways is really harmful to some folks, right? And on the other hand, we can hold the ways that, again, listening to Indigenous voices, folks who loved that representation, folks who felt seen. And then, of course, again, being, as I mentioned, a white person, me as little like 4-year-old, 5-year-old watching this, who just fell in love with Pocahontas and her story. And I just actually rewatched it for this podcast, and I was having all of the inner child healing moments, and all of my little synapses in my brain were connecting, and I was remembering why she was so important to me. And part of why she was so important to me is I didn't actually feel very represented by other Disney princesses. I was not blonde. I didn't really care a lot about, I don't know, getting the guy. There's just some other stereotypes of the other films that didn't resonate for me. But I did live in Montana. I was surrounded by nature. I loved talking to my trees. I grew up in a pretty rough household. I was very poor and, pretty abused. And it meant a lot for me to see magic come from what is available to all of us. And that is the land. And that is the earth. And in that way, I just want to honor how that is planting seeds, even in our little 90s minds, at least for me, of decolonization, right? Of like remembering the earth, remembering the power of nature and our connection to nature, which even sounds weird because we are nature. So these are things that had me cheering in my little Pocahontas like pajamas with my little beads, and I was like, I'm Pocahontas. That's me. That's me. And then I think as an adult, we can now understand some of the themes. And this is what I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on. We can understand more of these themes that it presented with us, like the way that these white men came and exploited the land. In fact, I love what does Pocahontas's father say? He says these white men are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, like why didn't we listen? Or maybe some of us did, or again, probably historically Indigenous people were like, yeah, duh. And there's other themes that come up that are just so special in terms of spirituality, connecting to our ancestors, connecting to the land. And there are even some themes of toxic masculinity, how Ratcliffe, the villain, essentially like treats all of the men in as products, or what they can produce is their worth, like mine for me or you're worthless, shoot for me or you're worthless. And so I just feel like if we really look at Pocahontas, there's a lot of lessons that we can take from it. And the fact that Pocahontas herself embodies these concepts and lessons as this character is just mind-blowing.
I love everything you said. I think actually a lot of the points that you brought up specifically around like being connected with nature was something HB and I both mentioned in the small episode we did for her, where we were trying to navigate the nuances and trying to hold the both end of like, we recognize that Disney's portrayal is a very whitewashed, colonized, like you said, propaganda essentially, portrayal of her, and the real story is very tragic, but, or I should say, and it's, as you are embodying, Kitty, it's okay to hold the both and for those things. So yeah.
I also just want to mention that like listening to Katie talk makes me feel so calm.
Katie does that to people.
I was like, man, I feel so good right now.
I forgot that we were recording an episode, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like when
Yeah,
Katie
me
stopped
too.
talking, I was like, what do I do now?
I know.
Can talk more? Like, I was like, just keep going. Like, I needed like a mic drop moment to like snap me out of it. But yeah,
I know.
like,
I was
'cause-
like
and
ready to sit back and just take in all of this information. Like, teach us
yes, I
wise
feel like
Kitty.
I was like actively like integrating like new things, like as you
Yeah.
were speaking, like it was like there was new connections that were like happening for me.
Mhm.
And I think that I have very like as you're speaking, I'm like, yes, I too love Pocahontas. I also, like, as a young child, very much like resonate. Like, we had woods in the back of our house, and I would be out in the woods for pretty much any time I wasn't in school. I was like out in the woods. Loved, being with nature and being in the dirt and being with the bugs and talking to the trees and the animals and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely, if you were like, oh, talking with animals in the forest, you resonate with, Snow White or Pocahontas, I would have picked Pocahontas like 100%, like hands down. But I think as I have grown up, I have separated myself because I adopted a narrative of like that's not for me, in the sense that, there was this story of this real person that existed, and then it was taken and whitewashed in a way that it just like took away from the truth of that historical person and the weight and the gravity of what occurred to that person. And that was where I'm like, oh, I almost like I don't want to look at it, but it's important to look at it. It's important to hold the both, and it's important to honor the things about that spoke to me, and also honor the parts of that were just grossly inaccurate, and yeah, essentially like propaganda that were meant to make people who look like me more comfortable with what happened on the land that we live in.
Mhm.
Oh, snaps all around.
Yes.
Damn.
Yeah, and it also resonated, everything Kitty said resonated with me too, because like my two favorite Disney heroines growing up, which I believe I talked about in the Esmeralda episode, like my two favorites were Esmeralda and Pocahontas, and to grow up and realize that it was a very like nuanced and potentially problematic not necessarily like portrayal, but like just the way in which things were done, with these like very marginalized groups of people that I don't have any technical personal connection to. Like, I also did the same thing. I sort of like, I have pictures of me dressed up as a child as Pocahontas and as Esmeralda, and like, there is a part of me that's like, I have to burn these. I can't be seen in these costumes. Like, oh my gosh, it's like there's a part of it that's like really embarrassing that I feel bad about. But I think it's nice to have conversations like this and be like, well, first of all, I was a kid. I had no idea of those complications and nuances at the time. Also, it was the 90s, so it was a very different time. So my mom also didn't see any problem with me dressing up as these characters. And I think like that's a thing too, is like, I think what my mom saw was like, my daughter sees Esmeralda, and when she puts on this like, flowy skirt with bells on it, she dances around and she sings and she looks happy, and like that's all that my parent cared about when I was dressed up like that. It had, that was that. And so like I think there's something to be said about that too, of like connecting to that inner child and that childlike joy of just seeing someone who made me feel happy and who made me feel, like I could do anything. Yeah. So it's just nice to sort of be like, I don't have to hide this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather, I think that's like the main difference though between like acknowledging this happened while I was a kid and these were the circumstances, and now I have more information and would make different choices. And obviously, well, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to go and assume that you don't still dress up like Pocahontas, right? So
I do
like,
dress up like Moana though, so there's that.
but I think acknowledging, just like Kitty said, the actual real history and impact, and having that inform your choices makes a big difference. And that's like not to make this about like cancel culture, but I am going to just say my little piece about cancel culture. I hate it. I think that it does not leave room for the fact that people can change and that they can learn and grow from those experiences. I think, yes, there are lots of problematic things, and should they have been done differently? Absolutely. But if we can't talk about it and we can't learn about it and we can't grow from it, like, what is the point?
That
Yeah,
circles back to, oh, I saw a
Go
lot
ahead.
of different mouths open.
You know, well, I was just going to say, like, this is where, you know, in therapy, right, we talk about absolutes and where it can be quite problematic to get involved in like all or nothing thinking. And I think that what we're talking about here is really trying to embrace that gray area where there is a lot of nuance. There's a lot of different perspectives. There is a lot of different variables. There's a lot that we really have to consider. And it's going to be impossible for each person to acknowledge what something means to anybody else because it's not part of their lived experience. And so that's where, when we're talking in absolutes and we're pairing them with assumptions, it really puts us in a place where we're shutting ourselves down from being able to have that compassionate curiosity about somebody else's lived experience and what is coming up for them, and then invite a dialogue so that hopefully there can be learning and there can be growth and there can be, you know, some healing and repair that comes as a result of it, instead of, again, like having it be something that's all or nothing. We're shutting people down and there's no opportunity for anything to shift, change, or grow.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that, Amber, because there's a bigger question, and those of you who know me know I'm the existential person. So I'm like, if we zoom
I was wondering when we would go here.
if we zoom all the way out, you know, let's talk about the influence of the decisions we make. And what comes to mind for me is I'm thinking about Heather just mentioning this picture that you have, you know, dressed as Pocahontas, and I have one too. And I want to honor the part of you that says, do I burn this? Like, do I destroy the evidence? And I want to take us deeper, like under that is like, why? Does it feel like that would help? Like, and why does it feel like that would help? And is that the point? Is the point is, I want to help, so let me erase this evidence that this character impacted my childhood? Or are there, or is the heart message coming is wow, I really want to help. I really want to give care and love to Indigenous communities. And in that, if that's the real message, then good news, you can listen to Indigenous voices who are actively telling us how we can support them. And if I'm not speaking for Indigenous folks, and some might say burn that picture, and we can honor that. What I've heard more is like, okay, educate yourself, show up to our rallies for our missing and murdered Indigenous folks, you know, correct racism when you come across it. Do you make space in your containers for guest speakers who are Indigenous? Do you pay Indigenous businesses, right? Like places where there would actually be a ripple effect of goodness versus burning a picture of your inner child, having a good time connecting to Indigenous culture. So I just really want to take us, and I hope it's okay, Heather. I just want to say I relate. And I like us to go to like, if a part of me really wants to help, I can do that. And there are lots of ways we can do that.
Yeah, definitely.
I just have to
Pretty
like
deep.
chew on that for a little bit. I was like getting emotional while you were talking, because yeah, I think maybe there's a little bit of perfectionism that can come up with that too, like moral and ethical perfectionism, because there are, I think of like my teenager self who was so influenced by a certain religious group into perceiving and thinking about people in a certain way. And like every now and then I'll come across like an old note from school or like my Bible or something, and just like the things that I was being taught is so not who I am now. And there's a big part of me that's like, I want to like get rid of the evidence that I was ever this person. And I never really thought about how that can be kind of damaging to the inner child or that past self who didn't really know better. And now that we know better, we do better. That also reminded me, Kitty, of what you were saying. It reminded me of how Disney didn't take down the film in like Pocahontas, and just we recently watched Peter Pan, how instead of taking it down, they have this statement at the very beginning for about 15 seconds that's like, there are negative portrayals and depictions of a certain group of people in this film. It was wrong then and it's wrong now, but instead of taking it away, we're going to have the discussion that this was wrong so that we can all learn from this. And I think, Kitty, exactly what you're saying, it's very important that instead, and Mallory, what you're saying, instead of canceling people so that we can't learn and grow and have the opportunity for change and growth, that it's an opportunity to learn. And that is all life is. No one has it figured out and no one's perfect, and it's unfair to place that pressure on ourselves or anyone, even someone that we look up to. It's not really fair to idolize them and put them on a pedestal to have it figured out. I think it's okay to look up to people so that if when they make a mistake, we can observe how they handle it. Do they take accountability, Amber, like you were saying, and admit their wrongdoing and promise change, or take action and consistency to change, or do they huff and puff and make it all about them and they're unable to put their pride aside? Very, very deep conversations here, and I love it. I love it. I mean, this is what we're here for. So thank you.
Yeah, and
I
think
love
like
all
when
of this.
I was just gonna say, like, but and that's also where, like, when we erase history, it takes away our ability to learn from it, and then we are destined to repeat the past. Because again, like, we have certain behaviors and certain biases that, we are just, it's something that we see this happen over and over and over again. But when we don't have that point of reference to be able to be like, okay, look, like this, when we take that away, there's our learning opportunity that's like gone like out the window. I actually didn't know that they had added those things into the beginning of the films that have problematic depictions, and I'm really happy to hear that, because I personally don't think the solution is burning it, erasing it, taking it away. I think it's about being able to invite a conversation, and specifically inviting in the voices of the people who should be the ones that have the platform to educate about, what their perspective is, instead of other people making assumptions on their behalf, because then we're just furthering the silencing and the taking away of their voice.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I love that
Yes.
this conversation, like, totally opened up a conversation about, like, at the heart of this is about shame for past decisions and not having the information you have now, right? And just to bring us a little mental healthy, but like, as you guys are all talking about this, it's really making me think about particularly my kids that I work with that struggle with like significant severe self-harm. And when you do struggle with that, sometimes there are literal marks and scars that will not go away, at least not without medical intervention. And even with then, it's still part of like your journey, your body, your presence. And so there is this decision, like, do I share this? Do I expose this? Do I keep this for myself? How do I navigate and talk about this? And so I love that we're having this conversation, because this is the problem that I have with cancel culture, is that like when you erase, you can't acknowledge that this was part of how I got to this point that I am now. And I am doing things differently, hopefully. We're still learning and growing, and you can too. Like, I think it's so important. Like, Heather, you even just being super brave to just admit and acknowledge publicly, and like, here's your face, your name, and everything. Like, this exists. And this is how I feel about that. That's so empowering for people.
Yes. No, I so hear you, Mallory. And I think about, like watching Pocahontas again as a grown-up recently, and like listening to Colors of the Wind, right? And remembering, and I felt like I was doing time travel. I'm like, I'm remembering hearing this as a child and how it felt so magical and embodied and true. It felt true. And I'm having that same experience as an adult. Like, it feels magical and embodied and true. And again, for those of you who know me, like, I'm out here touching trees. Like, the river is my brother, the otters are my cousins, like are like my besties. And I think what is a big theme we're talking about here is being intentional, right? And can I receive the energy that is expressed through the symbols of these words, of these characters, of these songs? Can I receive that energy and use it, for lack of a better word, use it intentionally? And in my case, use it to then fuel my social justice work, my trauma healing and community work. And in that sense, I think about the legacy again of the actual true, like, Pocahontas, and I think I can feel good about taking that energy to create a positive impact. And it feels good.
Heather, I am curious, not to like put you on the spot, but like, how are you feeling like hearing all this like love and care and information pouring back to you? Because this is very particular to you.
Thank you. It's great. It's got me thinking about other areas in which I like maybe haven't changed as much as I have wanted to, or like it's definitely got me thinking, because like I very briefly mentioned, I don't know if you heard it, I still cosplay as Moana. I am a person of color, but I am not Polynesian or from her culture. But what I take away from the way that I do the Moana cosplay is that I bring my own energy to the character, and I do it for the joy of seeing children look at me and what happens to them. Because I do share a lot of, even though I am not of the same culture she is from or of the same descent, I look a lot like her, especially when I'm in the cosplay. And I think that's why I do it, is because I see people, like children, believe that I am her. And that really brings me a lot of joy. And so like there's a convention that I go to every year, and there's always a Disney sing-along, and I always bring a Disney cosplay to that Disney sing-along. And this year I brought Moana, and it was just, there was this like little 2-year-old girl who's just standing there staring at me instead of dancing because she couldn't believe that Moana was there, you know? So it's like I take exactly what Kitty said there at the end, and I'm sort of like, I'm taking the energy from a character that I love and I'm putting it back out in the world and doing good with it, I think. While also still supporting the cultures, you know.
Yeah, I think even as a society, though, we very much still are learning just within ourselves. I just think about even like, I very distinctly remember being in 6th grade at like the flagpole, because 6th graders got to raise a flag in the morning. It was like a big deal. And we would always like talk about something. And Ellen had just come out as being gay the night before on TV. And I remember like being like, who's Ellen and what's gay? Like, that language just did not exist in my world at that point. And I mean, now it's so lovely that like it's not, it still is unfortunately like a little strange. Like, it's kind of like this unique thing when we see on the show like Fellow Travelers, like a couple that it's a male and a male who are together, and that's the feature. That's like still considered odd in media, but like in day-to-day life, it's not odd to have like 2 mothers or multiple parents if it's like a poly situation or things like this. Like, there's so much exposure to this that I think that the safety around conversations around race, around culture, around gender, around like all these different identities has definitely changed so it's easier to talk about this stuff. I don't think it's where it needs to be. I think we are still learning, and there's probably going to be language and things that like we're saying today that in like 5-10 years we're going to be like, oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed that I used that language.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to like intent versus impact. I talk about this a lot, right? Like we can only be responsible for our intention. We cannot be responsible for the impact because as we highlighted in the beginning of this, right? Like my intention was just to invite, that panelist to maybe take a step back, allow some of the other panelists to have a moment to answer the question before that person jumped back in again. That was my intention, right? The impact was that person became emotionally dysregulated and activated and decided to, stomp out and have a little temper tantrum and leave the panel, right? That was the impact. That was not my intention. I cannot be responsible for the impact. But I think, again, it goes back to that know better, do better, right? Until we know, because like our child selves, like we had no idea, right? Like our 90s, selves had no idea. Our, 5 years from now selves are going to know more than ourselves do now. And this is something that Marissa said, it's like doing the best that you can with what you have at the time and giving yourself grace, and then also asking for help, asking for education, using the resources at your disposal. And Kitty highlighted, really like go out and look at the people who are having a different lived experience than yours and learn from them in an open, compassionate, very loving, curious way. And this is where it's no one's job or responsibility to educate you. But chances are, if you're approaching with compassionate curiosity, people are more than happy to share, because we are very isolated in our experience right now. So the more that we can open and widen our lens and make space and room for all of these different lived experiences that are going to enrich our understanding of what it actually is to be having this experience at this time in this space, the better off we're all going to be.
Hey everyone, LB here. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of our final roundtable. Go check out part 2, where a lot of the topics that we talked about actually come full circle, which was pretty cool.